by acknowledging here the British people of the Eora Nation, but I also wanted to acknowledge the Noongar people, which were the first, when I set foot in Australia, was in Perth, Western Australia, and therefore it was Noongar. And the reason I do that, I hope, will become clear, and I wanted to try and take you on a little journey with me about something that's fascinated me since I was little, and try and explain how sometimes these things that happen to us keep repeating through our lives as artists. Some strange fascination with things. I don't know if this is going to work, but I'm going to try it. So, as Ross pointed out, that line is the county that I'm from. Is anybody from Lincolnshire here? No. Okay. Well, Lincolnshire is a very strange county. It's the second largest in the UK after Yorkshire, and nearly everybody who was young left it because it was dull and boring. Now, obviously, you're thinking that I'm being silly, but not really. If you know the song by the Smiths, when he says, trudging slowly over wet sands, back to the place where your clothes were stolen, it's a seaside town that they forgot to close down, come Armageddon, come, then that was Sutton-on-Sea. And you can see the beach going along. I don't know if I've got a... No? I do? This side? No? Oh well, never mind. I'll point and you can see the line coming from my finger now. But I had a sea wall where I lived. The sea was 15 foot higher than the land. I mean, I don't know if you can conceive of living somewhere where every day you walk up on a sea wall and the sea's going up 15 foot above you twice a day in a tidal place. And so when I stood on the sea wall, I could see the sea stretching for miles. There was nothing else there because in Lincolnshire, I'm a Fenlander. I'm from the flatlands. And Lincolnshire people are called yellowbellies, not because they're cowards, but I most probably am a coward, and therefore it would fit really well, but because they used to wear a yellow sash when they went to war on their stomach. So I'm trying to give you a little thing that this landscape, this flatness, was something that really got to me, this spatiality between me and it, this bizarre fear of being in the middle of this space. So this is looking away from the seawall where I lived, and this was looking, and the other one was looking out to sea. So as you turned around a 360, you could see the curvature of the earth, and I loved to stretch my eyes. It was something that I really enjoyed doing. So this is me at 16. You can tell anybody who's old and comes from England that a C registration on your scooter meant that it was 65 it was registered. It was 66, I just got it, hence there's no crash helmet or anything like that that was deemed a bit silly to wear a crash helmet. So this is me in Sutton, and at 16 I was just getting on to finishing high school. So I wanted to just point out that I didn't do very well at high school. In fact, I did abominably. I mean, you couldn't think of somebody who does worse than I did. I came last 3 years running in a cross-country event. I mean, that is the record that I hold. Anyway, to get on quickly, because I'll just go on and on and on. I think I suffered from dyslexia. And I think anybody who's read an email from me would have spotted it almost instantly. So this dyslexia was part of my kind of ability, maybe, to deviate from certain paths, because I didn't understand certain things academically, so I had to try different things. Now, That's what my scooter ended up like. I didn't really have a photograph of it, but I wanted you to see what a real scooter looked like when you're young and these things are important. Much more important than school, I'll have you know. So from here I went to, of course, failed getting into foundation. I did foundation and of course I failed getting out of there because I didn't have the prescribed O-levels and A-levels to get on. And so I went through my Easy Rider phase after my mod phase, where I chopped a big Triumph Thunderbird and set off somewhere, and it broke down, of course, instantly, and we ended up where it broke down. Then I became a bit of a roadie, and then I went to university and managed to get in through what they call exceptional ability. Now, that's a title, grand title, but it just meant there was a loophole that you could get in if you didn't have O-levels. And once I was in, who needed O-levels? You all think that you'd still do? No. So in '77, I left to come to Australia, and this is the street party waving me goodbye. It was a beautiful day, and it was '77, it was Jubilee year, that's why I put it in there. And so I left in Jubilee and came to Australia. Now, when I got to Australia, I was amazed that I'd almost felt like I'd come to a hot Sheffield. It was totally different to what I imagined. I thought I was going to be stepping into what I thought was a foreign country, but I think I stepped into what I term the emptiness of resemblance. And this started to play as though it appeared to be what I was used to, but it was totally different. But there was tricks like Vegemite and Marmite. Now I'm a Marmite boy, and then suddenly I get Vegemite, and it looks like Marmite, but it's not Marmite. I mean, where the hell am I? And so I was lost in this almost bizarro world of... And so I went to do some research about this, and this is my home county, and obviously all of you know Donington because that's where Matthew Flinders was born, and Matthew Flinders came to Australia and circumnavigated Australia and also did some work in Spencer's Gulf. Now underlined there is Lincoln and Boston and Spilsby, and this is Spencer's Gulf, and Flinders stood at Spencer's Gulf and decided to rename the country that he'd landed on after Lincolnshire. Now, what sort of people do that? And so you've got Lincoln, you've got Louth, you've got Boston, you've got Spilsby. He even named it after his own town. There's a Grantham there. Now, I don't know if you know, Lincolnshire has the most Viking names for towns in UK because the Vikings came and they pillaged and slaughtered everybody on our coast, so it's very scant with people. But they had thorps and byes are all Scandinavian names. And so the names that Lincolnshire has are already partly usurped. And then Matthew Flinders takes these usurped names and puts them onto South Australia. And I became, to some extent, fascinated by this journey from nothing to nowhere. I could trying to get used to being in a new country, trying to see where my spatial relationships actually were. And these were publications that I made that I would mail out around the world to people who didn't really want them. I also did postal drops in Perth, which was a weird, like, here's your catalogue for all your electric goods, and here's this person holding a piece of string, And I started to realize that, because I didn't realize I had dyslexia, and I maybe don't, but I thought, why would you, if you knew what dyslexia was, would you make a word like dyslexia for dyslexics? I mean, I can't even spell it, let alone hardly say it. So, you can see that I'm trying to explore a spatiality here. I'm trying to come to terms maybe with being in a new country. And here I am measuring Perth. Now, this is significant, trying to measure space. I also used to make sound works of that. These drawings are the drawings that come from me making a sound work which uses the words below and cleverly panning it left to right. I mean, but that was clever stuff back then, so I don't want any Oh yeah, we've got 20 channels now. You used to get a stereo system with a ping pong tape, and it used to go ping pong across, and you go, wow, that ping pong sound is fantastic. So this is me doing a 20-foot drawing of a sound piece that I made of my understanding of how people dealt with the environment. And here's the rare earth of Ballajura was the advert where they just ripped all the trees out. And you can see in the background how they laid it to waste. And these are the sort of houses that were interested in a ripper, hard to believe, pool of dreams. And there's me in '83, strapping fellow, but the greater and fiercer the natural background, the more artificial the foreground. And these are all about cloaking and cladding. These are all cladding materials that are used in the building industry to cover up the fact of where we live, of where I lived, which was Western Australia. So they would build things and then they would cover it up with us. And I was really interested in Boyd's The Australian Ugliness as a thing to try and come to terms with. I would do drawings of sound. I would start to make tapes. What you saw there was a package, and this package would be mailed out with that tape on it for the poor, unsuspecting people. I would translate the image and turn it in. So now we're moving on to my spatial projects, where I started to work on the poetics of thresholds. Now here's a veranda. You all know what verandas are. I'm not very good with verandas. I don't like being on them. I don't like being seen to be on them, and I don't like seeing people when I'm on them. I find them acutely embarrassing places, and so I don't like to go there. But I became, when I was looking at research into the disparate horizons between Lincolnshire and Western Australia, which is actually very topographically similar, and so maybe I went home, is the situation of this abstract fetishized space of the veranda. And this abstract fetishized space of the veranda became something where people, between the public and the private, is a sort of space that you wonder, what's actually happening in that space? Why would people put that on the front of their verandas? I mean, what does it say about the people who are in that space? So now I've shrunk down a little bit to the gaps in between buildings. I became fascinated by the arrogance of architects. Sorry, architects, they're not really, but they do have a sort of control over our space to some extent. And the little bits that we get left over are the residual spaces in between the spaces, in between buildings. So if you took a sentence as being buildings, and then you looked at the space between the words, you might think that that little space, if you give it pause and so on, actually means a lot. So I did a 2-hour video of these spaces that, but I hurry along. So then I went from the veranda to the space between buildings to the space between your skin and your clothes. So I became interested in that space, but I also became interested in how much of us become part of our clothes. So I wanted to try and find a method of understanding that. So I got some silk and I started to grow skin cells onto it. Because I wanted to scan them with an atomic force microscope, because I think I could get down to a nano level and see how many atoms from me become part of the silk. And I'm putting that up because this is 1911, so this is not new. This is like what Boccioni said, was that when we sit on a chair or a bus, we become part of the bus. We become part of the world around us. There is no body in this context. So here's me with Symbiotica trying to grow skin cells onto gold, because I started to work on Midas, which is a fairly literal relationship to what Drexler might have talked about when he said that if we destabilize the nano world, we might come up with grey goo. In other words, everything might collapse into grey goo. So these are scans of that. This is an AFM, and AFM doesn't work with optics, it works with touch. And so that point down there is what scans the surface of the substrate. In this case, it was silver. In this case, it was a sample. When I did it, I coated that with gold. So I coated that with gold so I could touch a skin cell with a gold cantilever. In other words, I could touch gold. And these are the scans of me touching gold. And when you work in that methodology with a force spectroscopy model, that means you can rest the cantilever on the skin cell and it'll record the vibration of the atoms. And I could turn those into sound. And so there's a video of what happened when we created an algorithm, and I have to reference my collaborator here, Kevin Raxworthy, who helped me write the code to develop the algorithm that would eat away the skin cell once you touched that model down below. You would also hear the sound of this. So this was the sound of the actual atoms vibrating. But once you pressed it, you would actually hear. I went on then to start to see the space between life and death. So I'm back to space again. So I grew some skin cells to scan to see if I could scan a living skin cell as it expired. I also injected the serum with ether, which made it die in that same method of recording the surface. And this is the sound of living, and then the sound of dead. Now, I tried to find out whose skin cell it was so I could write to them and tell them what I was doing, but it's really quite complicated to trace the origins of these skin cells. So this is what a scan looked like. I don't know how I got through them all quickly. I must have had my finger on the thing while I wasn't looking. But this is a scan that each scan takes about 20 minutes. So you can just see them going through their motion now. And then I put them into a layer and put them into a Unity game engine. So then you could fly into the space between life and death by using breath. Now, in Genesis, breath was used as a means to bring life into Adam because God made him, and God was the first nano-assembler. He put this person together, but he was rubbish. So he had to breathe into his nose to give him life, implying that life has to be transmitted. So I wanted to know where life existed at a nano level. So I built this work where if you breathed on this model here, you would fly into this envelope between life and death. And if you breathed on it, you would actually start to make little A-life algorithms come to life. And if you kept breathing on it, they would grow. But if you stopped breathing, they would die. So these were like the forms that they would take. Then I became to UNSW and I met Andrea Murillo, who's in the audience here. And I became fascinated by the work that they were doing in developing a quantum computer. So now we're down to the space, the other side. It's almost as if we've come out of the space between into the quantum world, where there is no space, there's no measurement, there's no me having a measurement of, like I was working on in Perth, measurement is finished. And so I won't explain it in great detail because my kids get bored every time I even mention the word quantum. And if their friends come around and say, "What do you do, Mr. Thomas?" and they stop me straight away. They know the person will be scarred for life by my response. But I became fascinated because in real time, they're controlling an electron, a fundamental thing, a phosphorus electron at the very core. So they're controlling nature at that very core. And that's amazing. And they're interested in this. These blips are where the actual spin of the electron, even though the spin isn't spin, which is everything about quantum physics isn't what you think it's going to be. And if you think you understand it, you don't. So it's perfect for artists. So this is the data, to some extent, of a spin, of where the electron might spin to between north and south. So this is my rendition of the data that Andrea gave us, which was real-time data of the spin of the electron. And you can start to see the beauty, I think, of the patterns. So we're starting to experiment with how would you visualize the invisible world of quantum phenomena. Now here's me taking the sound of that data and trying to turn it into a graphite drawing. Graphite, carbon, 18% of you is carbon. So like pencil's like our brother, sister. You know, it's like, oh my God, hey man, pencil. We're like twins almost. I mean, why would we choose a pencil to communicate the invisible world with unless we were related? It doesn't make any sense not to do that. But I wanted something more than just a microwave signal. And so I tried to talk Andrea into letting me read to an electron. So I think it might be a world first of people actually talking to an electron to get it to spin. And how it processed, how it happened, you'll have to take my word, it was all true. But fundamentally, they compressed it down into a small file. And this...
We had the same troubles with the probability in classical physics.
The blue is me
and
talking,
therefore the problem
green is the natural.
How can we stimulate
now I'm talking
quantum
to an electron
mechanics?
that's
There are two
held
ways that we
in
can
a
go
huge
about it.
magnet at
We can
sub-zero
give up
temperatures.
our rule about what the
I mean, if that's
computer
not cruel
was,
enough,
we can say,
they
let
then
the computer
bombard it with
itself
microwave
be of
signals.
quantum
And then me
mechanical
reading
which obey
Richard
quantum
Feynman to it.
mechanical laws.
And Richard Feynman was the person
Or we
who
can
developed
turn
the
the other
concept
way and say,
of quantum computing.
let the
to some
computer
extent
still be
in
the
his
same kind that we
1982
thought of
paper.
before, a logical, universal.
So you must be wondering what the artwork looked like that I'd make. So this was how the work looked. It takes the data of that sphere that we showed you earlier. It places these little exploding visualizations, and now you can see that sphere quite clearly, and you can see these exploding areas within that. And it had an 8-channel sound piece where I spoke to the... And this is one where I've developed it further, where you can actually interact with it with your hand to actually move an electron around in space. And this is a set of paintings I've just done that try to visualize exactly the same thing, but in an analog way, like painting. I mean, I came over to UNSW as the head of painting, which was quite a strange move for UNSW. And if it wasn't for David coaching me sometimes, it would have been a very strange move indeed. But I was trying to, let's say, talk about things that were happening in this world. And where I'm going now is I'm really interested in quantum biology and whether quantum intuition or whether intuition itself is a product of quantum tunneling. Quantum tunneling is a thing I can't explain, but it's a wonderful concept, too good to not be true. So, lots of stuff about quantum biology now, if you want to read up on it, it's very exciting, and I think it's the future, along with how birds migrate, how plants photosynthesize, is all to do with quantum phenomena. And if we have and understand quantum phenomena and we are nature, then would nature in the evolution process use quantum phenomena? Then what would the answer be? Yes. I was waiting for you all to say yes. So I'd like to just finish, and I'm sure I've gone over time because I was trying to pace it really quickly, but I maybe didn't, is to thank my wife Christina, who has to put up with me talking about this all the time. And she asked me to try and get out of my head sometimes, and not with drugs and alcohol, because I don't drink and I don't take drugs, and so I'm super boring. And you wouldn't believe that, seeing that I was a mod in 65, but it's true. So a dyslexic mod, 65. But I've had some wonderful people to help me with this work and to encourage me in testing these things out and trying to push the boundaries and allowing me access to their valuable research and allowing me to ask questions. Now, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a theorist, I'm not a historian. I'm an artist who's trying to ask questions. And I think that comes from my spatial awareness of where the mic is, to start to deal with the spatiality that I showed you at the very beginning. And I think that that is the significance that I wanted you to start to perceive, that maybe as an artist you have things at the very beginning of your life that inform you, and you spend half of your life trying to work out what it actually is and what you were doing and how you got to that point. And so with that, I want to finish.